Hello, it's another Friday Night Photoshop. I'm Mike Leonard, and tonight we're going to be talking about raw processing and a couple of other tips along the way. So let's just dive right in. Maybe you know somebody who's gotten a new iPhone and the option to take pictures in RAW mode is there, but people don't know what to do with that RAW file. This would be a good place to send them because I'm going to be processing some RAW files, including one out of a phone. So let's just start with this image here. This is a CR2 file. It's a RAW file. This came out of my Canon camera, and I took this over in Freeport, South Freeport Harbor. And first thing I'm doing is in Bridge, I'm just double-clicking on this. And when you open a RAW file in Bridge, it immediately spawns Adobe Camera Raw, and it brings you right into the editing interface. If you're not familiar with this, there's a couple of things you just need to think about. Over here are all the processing modules. And we'll go through these kind of like Gravity, where we start at the top and just work our way down. And then there's this little hyperlink down here that often gets forgotten. And this is very important. If I bring this up, you can see this is where we get to set the color space. You know, if you're going to be sending this off to a lab, they might specify a certain color space like sRGB. Or if you're doing it on your own, you might have adopted the Adobe RGB 1998 format. And some people may even be using ProPhoto. So I'm going to be doing sRGB 1966, and this is a good all-around one that's compatible with Walmart, Walgreens, and a lot of printers that are out there. I'll talk a little more about this image sizing in a bit, and for now, let's just close this and go back to the image. Now, we've had a lot of snow up here, as you can see, as you may have heard. And so I went over and took this picture in a nearby marina, Harrisseekit, over in Freeport, Maine, and that's home to LL Beans. And I just like the look of these dinghies here. So I took this shot. So I'm going to dive in and just do some quick processing and clean this up. First thing I'm going to do is hit auto, just to see where it takes me. I'm always interested to see where does it go. And that's not bad. It's a little bit bright, but the beauty of this is I can bring this down by just changing the exposure just a little bit. I can also bring down just the highlights, which this did bring it down quite a bit. By the way, not to jump ahead here, but this is a histogram up top. And as I move around this, you notice how certain areas become highlighted. That's because you can do adjustments right up here in the histogram. If I wanted to affect the dark areas, which is on the left-hand side, all I have to do is click in the histogram and move the mouse, and now that's going to bring up the dark areas. If I wanted to take the light areas and make them a little darker, I could come all the way over to this side, and I could work on those. You notice how just the snow is getting a little darker? And if I wanted to take the mid-range and maybe lighten that just a little bit, I can do that right up here. Now, in true Photoshop fashion, there's usually 2 or 3 ways to do the same thing. So here we've got these sliders down here. Exposure, just as you might imagine, it's just like affecting the exposure of the shot. And because it's a RAW file, we can go plus or minus 5 f-stops, which is considerable. Contrast, as you might imagine, it just makes it look pasty or makes it look a little more dynamic. I think I like something more in the middle. And by the way, I'm using scrubbies here. You notice how when I move the cursor goes to this little hand with the little arrows? All I have to do is when I get that, left click and hold and just move the slider, and it's going to affect that value, that control. Now I'm kind of liking how this is bringing out a lot of details here. Maybe I want to take the whites down just a little, and maybe I want to bring the contrast up just a little bit. Now, we've got this toggle down here, and we can go see where we started. Watch this. This is how we started, and this is where we're at now. So maybe I want to go a little darker. So that's under the light. Next one down, color. White balance, as shot. Because this is a RAW file, does this look familiar? You should have all these settings in your camera. And if I wanted to choose a cloudy day, I could do that. Maybe I'd like to choose shade, because that's more of like what the weather was there. And I like shade a little bit better, but honestly, I think I'd like to go grade digging here. And so what I'm going to do is pick up this little eyedropper and I'm going to come out and look for something that I feel should be neutral in color. And I'm going to poke around and see what makes sense. So maybe I'll try the snow here. Oh, look at that. I like that actually. I might just stop right there. And if anything, I might just return just a hint of blue back to this because you know why? It looks a little cold, doesn't it? And it is cold. Okay, so I'm actually happy with that. Now, temperature is color temperature, then we have tint, and then we have vibrance and saturation. Vibrance is going to affect just those colors that are pastels in the scene, and this will protect skin tone. So I can bring this up and you see how just those colors that are kind of pastel are becoming brighter. Versus if I were to do saturation, if you look at these gas cans that are orange, they're going to go really bright to the point where they're almost neon. All right. So in this case, I'm actually going to bring this down a little bit, but I'm going to then bring the vibrance up. And I like that. I think that looks pretty good. It adds a little bit of color into the areas here. There's not a whole lot of color in this scene, but this certainly has made some of the colors pop. So I'm done with color. Effects. There's a few controls here that I find are really valuable. Texture is great for bringing out detail in some of the subjects, kind of the low frequency subjects. Let's say if I had a wall of bricks and then a wall of cement blocks. Well, the bricks are a lot smaller than the cement blocks. This would be enhancing the cement blocks, whereas the detail one would be affecting the bricks, the finer detail. We'll get to that in a moment. So in this case, I do want to bring this up just a little bit because I do like what it's doing to bring out some of the detail. Clarity used to be called punch, and we can move this back and forth. You'll notice this looks kind of dreamy. I don't want that effect here, and I don't know that I really want to punch that up a whole lot. So I'm just going to go somewhere in the middle with that. Dehaze makes a big difference, but I don't know that it's anything I want for here. This is like removing fog or adding fog to the scene. By the way, if I simply double click on any of these little adjustments, it brings it right back to 0, so you don't have to worry about adjusting it. And then the last one of these that I use here is vignette. And I'll bump this down just a little bit, just to subliminally affect the edges. And if I turn this on and off, you see here's off and here's on. I just like how it darkens the edges just a little bit and it makes your eye look more at the center. From effects, I'm going to skip over one here. I almost never use curve. This is for if you want to get in and do some critical adjusting to the tonality, but honestly, I almost prefer to do that in Photoshop. And again, it's not something I do a whole lot of. Color mixture, if I had a color cast or if I wanted to go in and affect some color in here, this is where I would do that. And I'll just do a quick sample here. If I'm under saturation and I go click this little sample point, you see it brings up this menu down here, hue, saturation, and luminance. If I didn't want these reds to be so red, I could just simply click on this and just move it over. And you see now the reds are gray. Or I can bring this up and I can even make them more red. It's pretty nice for selective colors. How about the boat here? This part of the boat, I can make that more blue-green or I can make it less blue-green. This allows me to go and do some critical color adjusting here. Maybe I'll bring that up just a little. You see it brought up some of the ocean. It finds everything that is that shade and it'll either amplify it or it'll attenuate it, either way. Color mixer can be a really good one if you're ever working with old images and you need to get rid of a color cast in just a certain area. But in this particular image, it really doesn't need it. I just played with it a little bit just to punch up this color and this color. Next one down, color grading. This is comes from the video arena. This is where you can take highlights, shadows, and midtones and add a color cast or remove a color cast. I almost never do this unless I'm doing photo restoration. Now the next one down is detail. We need to sharpen this image and we would also like to remove some noise. So to do that, I'm going to click and hold my mouse on this masking key and I'm going to hold the Alt button and you'll notice the whole screen goes white. Now as I move this across, you'll notice that I'm getting this image of the image, but it's just in black and white. And if you can imagine, everything white here is going to get the benefit of the controls north of this masking, which is going to be the sharpening. And the controls south of masking here, which is noise reduction, everything that's dark on the screen is going to get that benefit. So if I were to start over here and be in white, and if I were just to enhance this, I'm going to be enhancing the noise, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to move this masking over until I just get the black solid, the way that I'd like it to be, right there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is come up here and I'll do some sharpening. I'll just bring up the sharpening and the detail, and I got to bring up the radius a little bit. And then I need to clean up some of the dark areas. So if I take the luminance, I'm going to simply slide this over, and that's going to clean up the dark areas. Color, if you were to shoot in a very high ISO, you might get some color noise, and this is a great way to get rid of that. Now let's zoom in on this and see what we've just done. The back of the boat, or the transom, and the shadow down here, you're going to notice a big difference. When I go and undo what I've just done, you'll see that there's a lot of grain, and a lot of grain down in the water. If you look over toward the left there, the transom of the other boat, that too looks really grainy. Now watch what happens when I take my finger off this toggle, and you see how it's just gone back to being clean. Now it's good to look at this when you zoom in, because you get a better sense for what the noise reduction is doing. So I'm going to see if I back this all the way off, you see it's just really noisy. So I don't want that. So I'm going to bring this up to about here, and I might bring the detail down just a little bit, and maybe bring up the sharpening just a little bit. Okay. And so once again, if I look down here at the water here is a little bit grainy, but look at where it was. Very grainy. So this has just cleaned this up quite a bit. And when we come back to full screen, this is going to be pretty clean, and that looks pretty nice to me. I like the way this looks at this point. So I'm going to leave the detail, and the next two are important as well. This one, I have mine set up to automatically remove chromatic aberration, and also to immediately apply the lens profile. This tells me I've shot this with a Canon, this is the lens that I used, and this is the profile it's using. And so this is correcting for this. If I shut this off, you might notice a little bit of like a pucker in the middle, and also on the edges too. See, I just shut it off. Now I turn it on. That's just doing a lens correction, and it straightens things out. All right. And then the last two, I'm not even going to go into. Actually, the last one, that's lens blur. We're not going to be talking about that tonight. The next place I'd like to take you to are these controls that are just to the right of these editing controls. And if I start right up at the top, that's to toggle this to be full screen. And I always work on stuff here in Adobe Camera Raw full screen. I don't want to be working with a small screen. This next one, the edit panel, to me that's almost like a home key. Whenever I've done something, I go back up here just to click on this home key. Next one down is where I'm going to be able to crop and apply geometry settings. Now I do want to crop this, and I'd like to get rid of the boat that's up top here, and there's some other things I'd like to clean up. So my interest is to want to crop this to a 16:9. I'm only doing an aspect ratio crop. That means I'm not sizing this. I'm not attaching inches or pixels or anything like that. So I'm just going to go and center this up. I think I like having a little bit of water on this side of the dock and having some down below, and I've somewhat centered up these boats. And all I have to do is just double click and say that's fine. I could, if I wanted to, set a reference here and say, gee, I'd like to have something straight, so that dock would be really nice. And if I do that, it just rotates it a little bit. Now I can use the geometry adjustments, and if I click this, it's not going to move too much, just a little. But this is looking for things to straighten things out, and I like that. So I'll go with that. So to adopt this, all I have to do is double click. And there, I've just cropped it. Now again, we're not thinking about how big or how tall this is. This is simply a crop to an aspect ratio. Let me just show you some of the other options that are in here. 1:1, well, that's a square, right? 8:10, that's 4:5. 8.5 by 11, that's like a regular sheet of paper. 5 by 7, 4 by 6. 4 by 6, by the way, that would also be 6 by 9. And that would also be 8 by 12. So in this case, we just want 16 by 9. Now you can do a custom ratio. If you have a custom frame that might be an odd size, you can actually put the size in inches, and it'll crop it to that ratio, and then we can size it later. All right, so we like the 16 by 9, so we're just going to leave that there. The next one down in the set here on the far right is the remove tool. This can be really handy for wanting to clean up certain things. How about that little rope that's up there? I don't know if I like that rope, so I'm going to say remove that and watch what happens. The rope is removed. And I go back to my little home button up here. There we go. As I come down, we have this masking tool. Now, I don't really need to mask anything in this image, but if there was a subject or a person in here, I could actually select that subject, and I could go so far as to isolate their eyes, their nose, their lips, their face, their shoulders, their teeth. It's incredible what this will do. There are some other tools here that can be really useful, like the linear gradient tool. That's a great one for if you're ever wanting to darken or add a color cast to just one area. Let's just try it. In fact, we'll do linear gradient. And I'm going to start here in the bottom, and I'm going to pull up. Where it's red, that means it's going to be the full effect. And I can even move this up a little if I want. And this is going to taper off to no effect. So this is the area that I'm going to be affecting. And watch what happens if I come over here and just simply take the exposure and bring it down. You notice it's only affecting the bottom area, just that one area that I selected. So maybe I'll just bring this back a little. And I like the fact that the water's just a little bit darker in that area. So I like that. So I'll leave that in. I'm going to go back to what I call the home key. Now, if there were people in here with red eye, here's how you get rid of it. And then we've got some ability to take all these settings that I've just adjusted, and we can save them and make snapshots. And there are some presets that you can download. I'm not going to go into those tonight. And then there's even more image settings. So I've adjusted this image, and I've pretty much gotten it right to the way I want it. So now I have to think about sizing. So let's say if I'm going to enter this into a competition and I need to think about resizing this into pixels, well, I simply choose resize to fit. And in this case, I want the long side to be 1920. And because I made this 16 by 9, the vertical size is going to be 1080, and we don't care about the resolution. So I'll just say, okay, now if I were to be wanting to make this print sized, I would choose inches, and I'd put in whatever inches I want. But in this case, we're just going to go with pixels, and I'm going to say OK. So now I've just done that, and the last thing I need to do here is to open the file. And if I come down here and say open, this will take it immediately into Photoshop, and it's going to remember all these settings that I had here that we just went through. If I hit the word done, it will close this, and it will also remember all these settings, including the crop. Because here's what happens. I'll hit done. And you see, we now have this image with all these adjustments that we've done. And we've got these two little sidecar files up here. One's telling me that this has been cropped, and the other one's telling me that, hey, we've made adjustments. The great thing about a raw file and doing what we've just done, it's all non-destructive, which means I can go and undo any of this and go do it all over again. So I haven't hurt anything. There's no reason why I can't come back. Maybe I don't like this quite so dark down here. All I have to do is go reopen this. It'll adopt all these file settings, including the crop. If I come up here to the mask and I choose this mask, maybe what I do is I just say, I think I would like to have a little less darkness down there, so I'll just lighten that up just a little bit, and I'll say done. And now it's just saved that, and again, I could go back and re-edit that. Now, if I wanted to open this into Photoshop, then all I have to do is reopen this. And now I'm going to choose Open. By choosing Open, this drops me right into Photoshop, And this is where I can come up and do a checksum. I go to Image, Image Size, and if I go to Pixels, this is 1920 by 1080, which is exactly what the Camera Club requires for projected image nights. Now, if you're entering this into another competition somewhere, they might have different dimensions for you, and you would have done that in that little hyperlink over in Adobe Camera Raw. But when you open it into Photoshop, this is where you would check that to make sure that it actually came through in those dimensions. So the last thing I would do here is to save it. And remember, this started as a RAW file, so I'm going to choose a Save As, and I'm going to save this as a JPEG file, and I'm going to put it right back into the same place, and I'll say Save, and this is where I get to choose the quality. Of course, I'd like the highest quality, and I simply say OK. Now this file is ready for competition or whatever I might want to do with it. Because it's 16 by 9, and because it's set for HD TV, if I were to view this on my television set, it's going to look beautiful. It'll exactly fill the screen. There won't be any pillars, there won't be any letterbox. This is going to exactly fill the screen. Now, if you have a 4K TV and you wanted to make this fit, the width wouldn't be 1920, instead it would be 3840, and the height wouldn't be 1080, instead it would be 2160, because that's what 4K is. And if you were to size this to 4K, and if you have a 4K TV, you're in for a real treat when you watch these. You just put them onto a thumb drive, plug it into the back of the TV, and have a nice little slideshow. And the detail, it'll look like you're looking out a window. It's that clear. Before I process this next one, I like to show this sample. This is the same image. In my camera, I captured it as a JPEG, and I also captured it as a RAW file. The thing is, the JPEG file is straight out of the camera. It's on the left. The one on the right is the processed file. You can see how much more detail there is in the embankment and also on the tower of the lighthouse itself, and even the sky. The color is just so much more vivid. This is why we want to be capturing in RAW mode. If you're not capturing in RAW and you're only doing JPEG, you're not making the best of your images. Again, if you know somebody who's got a great camera, or maybe they've got a new phone that captures in RAW mode, this would be a great session for them to watch. This next image is one that I took with my phone. It's a DNG file, that stands for digital negative. And because it's a DNG file, that's a RAW file. So Adobe Camera Raw spawns, and let's see what we can do with this. First of all, I'm just going to hit auto and see what that does. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes not so good. In this case, it's fair. So again, I'm going to start right here at the top with the light, and I think I want to bring the whites down because I'd like to get some more detail up here in the steeple, and sure enough, that restored it. See, if that was a JPEG, we'd be losing all that detail up there. And I may even bring the highlights down just a little bit, just to, again, gain back some details. And then I'll just take the shadow detail, I'm going to bump that up just a little. There we go. So I'm happy with the light here, so I'm going to jump down to color next. Now, this was the setting sun, so I'm going to just slightly add a little more blue to this. And I think that's okay. And I might even bring the saturation down just a little, but bring the vibrance up, because I like that blue sky. Okay, so I'm done with that. Let's go to effects. I always like to vignette things. So look at that, brings the road down nicely. So there's that. And let me just move texture over just to get a little more detail, sharpen that up. Clarity, I might actually back off just to soften it a little. I'm not going to do anything with dehaze. I'm going to skip right down to, maybe I will do color mixer. Yeah. And I'm going to choose the sample tool, and I'm going to click right here in the orange area. I do like that setting sun orange, but you know, I'd like to have just a little bit less of it, because you see, that's too much. So I'm going to go just a little bit less. I think that's fine there. And maybe down here in the snow, I'll just take out some of the blue, because I don't know that I want all that blue down there. Now I'm skipping right over to detail, and again, masking. I'm going to click and hold, and I bet you will see a lot of noise in the sky. Yeah. See how grainy the sky is? That's not unusual for a phone camera. So I'm going to want that sky to be nice and clean, just like that. I'm going to bring up that luminance to take care of some of that noise up there in the sky. Maybe I'll bring up some more of the sharpening and a little more in the detail. I think I would like that blue just to be a little more. So this is where I'm going to take the vibrance and bring it up. I think I like that a little better. Okay, for optics, I've already got this turned on, so it recognizes my phone as a Samsung and S20 plus 5G, and it just did the lens correction. If I shut this off, you'll kind of see it pucker just a little bit. So that just straightened things out, which is nice. So I'm pretty well done here. So now let's just jump up here and look at cropping. Now, I did crop this a little bit earlier, so I just wanted to bring that out. And I don't know that I want that phone pole in the picture, so I'm just going to crop that out like that. That's pretty good just like that. I'm happy with that. And I also did straighten this. This is without it being straightened. It was off by quite a bit. So now just simply hit the A for the geometry. It finds lines that should be straight. And it just took care of that for me. So now I'm going to go back to this little home tool up here. I don't need to erase anything, although I would like to get rid of these power lines, but there's another way we're going to deal with that. I don't need to mask anything, and there's no red eye, and I'm not going to save a snapshot of this. I am just going to take you to a before and after. This is how we started, and this is where we're at now. Now I come down to this little hyperlink, and this is where I have to make some decisions about size. For this, maybe I'd like to print this. And if I make this 6 inches tall, then it tells me that this is going to be 4.5 inches wide. Now that's kind of an unusual size. What if I make it 10 inches tall? It'll be 7.5 wide. Now I could choose short side and say, what if the short side was 8? Well, this tells me it's slightly over 10 inches tall. This is where I might want to come back and rethink the aspect ratio. In this case, I really didn't set it, but let's say if I wanted to do, can I do a 4x6? Yeah, I can. Let's see, how does an 8x10 work? That's a 4x5, right? Oh, I think this is going to be nice. So I'm going to bring that out to like that, and that out to like that. And maybe I'll even go up just a little bit. All right, I think I like that. So this is an 8x10. Now when I come back down here to this little hyperlink, and I go to inches, if I put in for the long side to be 10, by default the short side is now 8. Because again, we declared the aspect ratio before. So I'll say okay. And do I want to do anything else to this? Maybe I'd like to lighten the snow down here just a little bit. So I'm going to go take a mask, and this time I think I'm going to use a different mask. I'm going to take and use a brush. And if I use the bracket keys, I can make the brush a little bigger. I'm just going to do that. And now I think I'm just going to simply lighten that just a little bit. I still have some darkness here, which is okay. I'm going to go back to this, what I call the home key. And I think we're pretty good with that. So now I'm going to go ahead and open this. By opening this, we just jumped the fence and over into Adobe Photoshop. And now when we look at this, I'd really like to get rid of these power lines because they're kind of annoying. And when I look at this, that's not what I want this to be remembered by. So there's this tool that I would like to demo. It's called the Remove tool. When you look at all the options that are under this particular tool, you might be familiar with the Spot Healing Brush and the Healing Brush and the Patch tool, which are really important tools. But when we choose the Remove tool, you get some different options up here at the top of the screen. And under Find Distractions, there's wires and cables. Now, simply by choosing that, and depending upon how fast your processor is and your graphics board is, watch what this does for your image. Now, those who are watching this live are seeing this in real time. And there you go. This is what the Find Distractions, Remove Wires just did for us. Now, that's the scene that I remember and that I will remember years from now when I think about this particular building, the old meeting house. Now, I can just go and confirm that the size is what I want it to be. Here it is in pixels. But if I go look at it in inches, It's 8 by 10. And I'll just go ahead and save this. I'll do a save as, and I can save it as whatever file type I want. So for now, I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file, and I'll also go and save it as a JPEG. And I don't have to be quite that high quality, but that's fine. So there is a quick look at some raw processing and some other tips that I thought you might like to see. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you again.